inside a body to go from a body doing its normal thing to suddenly having a cancerous growth.
It's sort of cells that form each other, right? And then eventually they mutate to be able to get another.
Yeah, so the key thing is that there are mutations that happen within cells that cause them to not behave properly. And so normally during cell division, you've got you copy the DNA, you separate the copies, and you divide the cell, and you repeat that over and over again as many times as you need. And so during the regular process of a cell going through that cycle of copying, separating the copies, and dividing, there are these checkpoints along the way where there are certain genes that get expressed to basically assess the quality of the cell, the quality of the previous step, and see if anything gross went wrong, like big problem with the cell. And if something did go wrong, there are programs that can be triggered that cause the cell to basically kill itself. Or there are programs that can fix certain errors. And so there are these checkpoints cells go through. So there are genes that get expressed to cause them to arrest growth and development, or growth and division, and check things out. And then there are genes that get expressed to cause the cell to motivate and kind of go through the cycle. So if you get mutations in those sets of genes, the genes that either are the ones that check things over to make sure it didn't go wrong, or the genes that are the motivating genes that say divide, 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 you get mutations in either one of those, you can get inappropriate cell division. And that's basically all that tumors are, is cells that are dividing inappropriately because they've acquired some type of mutation. So how many mutations does it take to go from a regular functioning cell to a super aggressive metastasizing? Do you guys know what metastasizing means? So metastasis is when a cell leaves the site of the tumor and spreads into other tissues of the body. Now, I think you can imagine that that's bad. I mean, a tumor is bad, but a tumor in one site you can deal with. Once it starts spreading throughout the body and colonizing other tissues, it's really, really hard to target it and cure the individual. So metastasis and metastasizing, it's a big problem. When they start doing that, it's hard to fix things. So how many errors is it? It's like one error and then suddenly you have unrestrained growth? It's quite a few errors, right? So it's like an error happens and those cells start dividing a little bit more than others. And then within that pool of individual cells that are all the descendants of the original mutation, if you get another mutation that causes them to either divide even a little bit faster or secrete some chemical that draws in more nutrients or whatever it is, that pool will then start outgrowing the other individuals in the tumor. And then if within that new growth you get another mutation, you start getting multiple sequential mutations in one cell line that eventually lead you to this really aggressive cancerous growth. And I think it's cool for us to think about because I think there are some similarities to evolution by natural selection, right? Anybody sort of want to try to articulate that? Go for it.
I mean, well, it's the same kind of thing. It's like in a population of the same species, like everyone's competing for limited space and resources, which is kind of what it said, and they mutate or like adapt to their environment to just get an edge, and then it was kind of describing how it like refined like the ones that were more adaptive, that had mutations, would compete with them and create like this almost, I picture like a supercell for cancer, that keeps replicating. So it seems like it's like the fittest will survive. So.
Yeah, and then when we start targeting them with a drug, chemotherapy, whatever, what happens to that line of cells? They continue to evolve. And so if a mutation happens that makes them resistant to the chemical we're poisoning them with, then within that pool, you suddenly have regrowth happening. And that's kind of what they were talking about in that video we watched at the end of the last section, right? They treat one specific mutation with one drug, but then the cells evolve a new response to that, and they're able to sort of elude that. And so it really is, it's just like evolution, it just happens to be to the detriment of the individual. It's like evolution happening within the organism, and the cells themselves are like the species, if you will, or the individuals of the population. So it's kind of, I don't know, it's kind of interesting to think about it that way. So what about those facial tumors? kind of make you want a Greek salad? Do you remember the part where they compare it to feta cheese? Sorry. So what's the deal with the facial tumors? What's weird about them compared to other tumors?
It's the same kind of cancer, it's just replicating the entire population.
It's a projectile cancer. I mean, like it can spread because it did that error and it just did it so well in a species that happens to have optimal like an environment for it to spread. It's a spreading tumor, and they said there was one other one, but they didn't really go into detail about it. I guess it's in dogs.
Yeah, so there's this venereal tumor in dogs that is the same basic idea, which is that unlike other contagious cancers that you may have heard of, like HPV or Epstein-Barr, which causes mono and also can cause like lymph node tumors and things, those are viruses that carry genes that can basically cause your cells to start dividing uncontrollably. All right, and so you can get infected with a virus, and that can induce your cells to become cancerous. But in this case, it's not a virus that's being transmitted. It's actually like cells. So when these Tasmanian devils are like biting each other when they mate, they have a very sort of violent mating ritual. They like get cuts on their faces and things, and if one has the tumor, like the feta cheese, like grates off into the cuts on the other one, and then it starts growing on that new individual. And so it's actually a cell that gets spread, like a Tasmanian devil cell that gets spread from individual to individual through their mating. And the same holds true for the venereal tumor in dogs. So it's kind of a wild thing to think about, right? And it's kind of, I don't know, is it a species? What do you guys think? Is it an organism itself?
You could call it a parasite on its own.
Yeah, it's kind of like a parasite. It's like a cell parasite that is derived from the species itself, right? And it's one of those weird things when you think about, natural selection, like these are the extensions of it, right? And these are the weird things that happen as a result of these processes. We'll skip the can tumors be good question, but let's talk about Henrietta Lacks. Who is she and what's special about her cells?